75 this year.
Sorry.
And we've heard that the Senator King is going to go after another 70 to $100 million next year. We're going after $195 million in grant from the feds this year. Oregon is way behind the power curve as far as supporting this project with funding. So we're going to be looking for your operation to come up with more innovation and what can we do different, breaking glass, to get our message out there and attract at least, equivalent to what Washington is doing. We need your help. And I'd like to hear how you're going to do that.
Absolutely, Commissioner Fox. Hear you loud and clear on that. I think that obviously that is our number one goal for the 2022 interim and heading into the 2023 session is to pursue a major tranche of funding. As you saw up in Washington State, they were able to get a large funding allocation for the project as part of the 2022 transportation package that passed up there. And so, that is often going to be the best avenue for getting a large amount of funding for a transportation project on the scale of the Hood River Bridge project. And with the Oregon legislature seriously considering it's paying for its portion of the I-5 bridge project with a funding package, that will be one of the avenues that we're pursuing for funding in the legislature in 2023 is pursuing a large allocation as part of a probable, or at least somewhat likely at this point, transportation funding package.
So I do understand, Miles, that you may have an announcement here pretty quick. So I'm going to turn back over to Dan. And Dan, what's your plan to help us attract significant amount of money this year? I mean, this next period.
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner. And I think Miles alluded to it pretty specifically. And I'll say my sense is that the plan is actually working itself out. I think we've always anticipated that the Washington transportation package would move first. It did. Brad and his team were extraordinarily successful in that regard. And I think it adds leverage to where we are. The plan on transportation investment in Oregon, my estimation has been that it would be a 2025 package. The acceleration of the I-5 bridge project, and it's moving forward as a priority and a desire to fund it, has opened up the opportunity, I think, for other significant investments, including ours. We have the added benefit of having a major investment made in Washington that corresponds with a major investment on the I-5 bridge as well. And so the work that needs to be done is really a continuation of what we have been doing, an acceleration in terms of the specific of the asks. But it is the work in front of us is really threefold. The first is frustrating as it sounds. We have an immense amount of education to do. Over a third of the legislature is going to be new in the next legislative session. We're going to have a new governor. We will have a new Senate president. We have a brand new Speaker of the House. There are 10 members of the legislature right now that are appointed rather than elected. Our own delegation may be brand new. It may not. And if it's not, both former Representative Helfrich and Representative Bonham are familiar with the project and will be able to will be quick studies in that regard. So the first level is more education of brand new members. We will have at least one new chair of the Transportation Committee, which would be building any kind of package. And so in the interim, we are going to continue to do the work that we did last time, which is invite you all to join us as we educate about the need for the project, make a significant number of meetings over the course of the next 9 months with regard to the ask. And then we're also, the second thing that we're doing is we're spending a lot of time with stakeholders, and we'll be asking you to be involved in this as well, in raising the need for the project with regard to other stakeholders that can begin to talk about the need for investment. There is, I think, a worry, and it is one that we have to be clearly focused on, that there will be an attempt to do only an investment in the I-5 bridge. That there will be some notion, and we already hear from it, that folks will say, we'll wait on all the other projects until 2025. And we need to help convince stakeholders and others that we need a broader investment now, not just for this project, but for others. And so that's the second level. First level is education. The second level is stakeholder engagement and familiarization with our project, which is, again, already been penetrated, but we have to raise the volume, as you suggested, Commissioner. And finally, will be the nuts and bolts of the legislative process as they start to build any kind of package. That process will likely start later this year, become more formal in the session, and engage that often and early. We're going to have to spend some time again with a new governor, with a new Senate president, and others about the notion of this as a priority. So that's the brief outreach. It is actually the game plan that we've had. The game plan has to accelerate. We always knew Washington would go first based on the timing of their investment. And we think that this next year we have an opportunity to strike as the timing of a transportation package in Oregon has moved forward. We just need to make sure it moves forward for everybody.
I'm just, I'll make one comment. 2025 is too late. We're trying to figure a way of doing a design build type program here. That's the quickest and the cheapest way of getting this bridge done in an inflationary period. And not getting a big chunk of change until 2025 or later really hamstrings our ability to do that. So I'm going to throw a challenge down to your company. 2025 is not the right answer. So we got to think out of the box, and we're all willing to get in a car and go down to Salem if we have to. But we need your help to, I don't care about I-5, I care about our bridge. And I'd like to see our bridge built and open for service before I-5 is even done with their design. And I think we can do that, but we need your help. And I see Miles smiling up there, and I guarantee you, folks, we could do this. If we really wanted to go do it, we could make it happen.
Yeah, Mike, I think a way that I might say it is we have an opportunity. River Bridge is ready to go. We have an opportunity to save the people money by going now. To wait when there's no reason to wait is just going to cost everyone money.
Is there other commissioners want to step in on this?
Yeah, I'll share something with Daniel. I met with Senator King over here on the Washington side, and just last week, and I think one of the things that if we are not able to get more funding from Oregon, before 2025, then that really also makes Washington state sort of just cautious about investing in this. Like, they don't want to invest in a project that might not happen, or, so we really do need it to be a little bit more collaborative from the Oregon side of things, because, we have the energy and support on the Washington side, but we need it to be matched, so that they feel good and more comfortable giving us those funds. And I guess one other question I have is there any chance to, before there's a huge transition of leadership and staff, is there any chance of getting anything else in 2021 before there is a change? Or sorry, 2022, sorry.
Yeah, so to the first point, I actually think that the leverage that you've just went through in terms of Washington's involvement, as well as what Commissioner Fox mentioned earlier, are actually great arguments why we need to fund it in 2023. And so those will be arguments that we use, that we let you use in the conversations. I would say, and Brad can correct me if I'm wrong, that my sense is that but for the transportation package in Washington, the allocation wouldn't have occurred. And in Oregon, I think it's not what's going on in Oregon is not a sign of a lack of support. It's a waiting for a transportation package, which is where they make these investments. And so I have not, in fact, every time we have asked, other than this most recent $20 million ask, every time in the legislative process we have asked, they've given us our full request. And so I am highly confident that if there is funding available for the state to spend on this project, that we have the support that we need there. I don't think there's another opportunity in 2022 to have that funding. And I would say actually the education level that has to happen, we're already doing that work because there's 10 members right now that are appointed. So that transition is already in the midst of happening. Thankfully, the new speaker, Dan Rayfield, was actually very involved in our first governance legislation around P3 that we passed several years ago. So he's familiar with the bridge. It's not clear who the new Senate president will be. I am hopeful that it'll be someone, and I expect it'll be someone that we have spent some time with on this project. The brand newness on the project will likely be rank and file members. I believe all three, in fact, I know all three of the gubernatorial candidates are familiar with the bridge. Some of them have come and toured. So I think the work is underway. I don't think we'll have an investment until 2023. I expect that there will be some level of transportation package, and our job is to make sure this project's in there.
Okay, so.
One of the thoughts about this process is that Washington and Klickitat County is uniquely positioned due to Senator King's his history in the legislature. Right now, with Chuck Thompson leaving, he was the one that kind of got the $5 million from the ARPA as on that subcommittee for Ways and Means. So I guess the question for you, Commissioner, and the lobbying team is the incoming, the next fall election, are any of those candidates, from your perspective, in a position to perhaps ask to serve either on the Senate Transportation Committee or the House Transportation Committee? And maybe you might have some background about how that happens. And is there stuff that we can be doing here to help encourage that?
I think whatever guidance we can get from our folks that are on the phone can only help us. I am not a politician by far. I like to go build stuff. So any guidance that you can give me, I'd be happy to go make phone calls and go sit on their front porch. I can do that, but I need some guidance.
Dan, does that make?
Sure.
Were you able to hear me? I'm not sure. I'm not close to a microphone, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So Senator Thompson was on the Capital Construction Committee and was helpful to us, frankly, as was Representative Williams, but in a different capacity, because the funding that we were pursuing was funding that flowed through the Capital Construction Subcommittee. And so he was helpful there. Ultimately, the final decisions and where we'll spend a lot of our focus is going to be on leadership as well as the Joint Transportation Committee, which you've mentioned, Kevin. And I would say membership on that committee is helpful. And those decisions will actually, frankly, be made much later in the year. So we could talk about a strategy with the ultimate winners and the candidates about which committees that they are requesting. The project ends up being put together really at a It's a negotiation level among the leadership, among the committee leadership. And then I would say history has the last time rank and file members of the committee do have more influence than if you're not in the committee. But that's frankly not where we're going to get we're going to need a commitment from the governor, from legislative leadership, and from the chairs of the committee on a significant investment. Even if one of our new members sits on the committee, it is unlikely that committee membership alone would turn into the magnitude of the ask that we have. And so it's, yes, it is helpful. We could talk about ways to engage that, but it's going to have to be a full court press on a larger set of leadership.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the next.
Sure. Brad, are you there? I see your purple bee.
Yeah, I am. I'm actually on the road heading over to meet with Senator King and doing an Eastern Washington swing. So I apologize for not being on camera. Do want to kind of walk through what we're looking at for this next year. We've got a couple of things that are, going to be front and center. The first is engaging with both the Department of Transportation, Office of Financial Management, as well as the legislature on phasing of the $75 million that we did get in the transportation package last year. None of that has been done yet. So while the money has been allocated, it's going to be there. How it's going to flow out and the timing of that has yet to be set. So we're going to be spending some time working on that in the coming months, as well as into next session. Also, as you guys probably know, they also included an internal tolling study with the Washington State Transportation Commission. So we've already met with the Transportation Commission. They are currently going through an RFP process for a tolling consulting company. And we will be working with both the commission and whoever they do bring on in the tolling on that tolling study. I think the legislature does have some questions around how much can be generated from tolls and at what level those tolls can be, depending on how this project moves forward. As was mentioned in the previous conversation, this project continues to be if not the highest, certainly one of the highest priorities for Senator King. He plans on continuing to do everything he can to not just maintain that $75 million we got last year, but as was mentioned earlier, build on that. I do think that with the passage last year and kind of the challenges at the pump right now, the odds of another transportation package within the next 2 years, I think, are going to be tough. But I do believe that eventually within the next 2 to 4, they're going to have to do an additional transportation package, which will include both fuel taxes and other types of new revenue streams. And I think we're going to continue to spend time positioning ourselves with that. And I know that Senator King will continue to try and add to that $75 million that was appropriated and secure more additional current revenue sources to help build on that. I just want to be realistic in that I think that it will probably take an additional transportation package on the Washington side to really boost that up significantly more. But we are going to continue to work on it. But in the near term, making sure that $75 million is available and deploys at a timeline that works for us is going to be the primary objective. So I'll stop there and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have a question? Okay, let's move on to the last one.
All right, well, I will put that up there, and that is Hal's summary, just so you have it as a backdrop. As you know, Hal has been working, and I know many in this room have been working to get legislative support for the joint build the joint infra grant application between Klickitat County and the Port of Hood River for $195 million. I believe Mayor Keithler has been very active on the phones, as has Mayor Kiewit. And I think maybe Jake's been involved with this as well. So I do know that Senator King did reach out to Representative Newhouse's office as well. And so I did get an email from Hal saying that that letter is coming together. If you recall, the deadline was last month, but the federal delegation, there's a little bit of leeway as to when their letter can be submitted. So again, Hal has been a really good representative for us back there. He has all the contacts within the agencies and on the Hill. And so Commissioner Chapman, who's with us today, has attended those in the past. And so and one of our items that we're going to be discussing as soon as this is over will be the trip back east. So obviously there's also been another funding opportunity that just was released last week, and that due date is in August. And so that's another grant application opportunity that we can take the $195 million application that's already been completed, make some modifications and resubmit that well in advance of that August date. And that heads up came from Hal as well. So, I still need to go in there and actually kind of take a look at what the ranges are and all the various criteria. But it is a bridge specific program, so it's a pretty large numbers. I just want to make sure we just need to kind of take a look at what the criteria are and where we fit into it. So I don't have specific numbers for you yet, but will. So other than that, any comments just for the record, feel free to add those here as this item is up.
I guess I have a logging question. The Oregon Transportation Commission, to what degree will they, or for that matter, ODOT, be involved in any decision making over the next couple of years? How much of our lobbying is focused on OTC versus the legislature?
Yeah, so the most of our work with the OTC was really around ODOT's discretionary decisions about how they were going to spend the IIJA dollars. And we did lobby them. With regard to a legislative package, ODOT will be intimately involved in putting together a transportation package with the legislature. They respond to the OTC. The OTC will undoubtedly weigh in with its goals around what should be in the transportation package. And so most of our effort will be at the legislature. It will be important for the OTC to continue to see the importance of the Hood River Bridge. It's important to note that at some level, the OTC views itself as having, its frame is ODOT, and that whereas the legislature would include all of the transportation needs in the state. And so there is a bit of a mismatch there. So it's important keeping both. The ultimate decision makers will be the legislature. Keep the OTC as advocates for the project will be important, but they won't be the decision makers.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on.
All right, more than welcome to stick around. Otherwise, we will continue to move through here. The next item, Commissioner Fox, there was the overarching document showing the full funding as well was after this discussion in your packet, which is kind of a very high level status on our funding, basically as of the end of this month. So you can see that there's the Oregon House Bill 2017 that's been fully spent. We are currently in the process we've actually submitted our first reimbursement request both to the ARPA funds and to the Washington funds. So haven't received the funding or the reimbursement request from them yet. Though I will say that the Oregon House Bill 5006 is actually there will be a full disbursement to the project. What that means is it's not a reimbursement. They're going to actually put $5 million entirety into the port's coffers, and then we do quarterly reports on how that money is being spent. As far as staffs go, it functions almost the same way as the reimbursement, but you will see as we get into the budget process that that $5 million does show up in our fund balances. So just going through here, the US build money, we haven't spent any of that. We're still hoping to get that finalized here in the next month or so. In progress, there's the $75 million from Senate Bill 5974, which I believe was the WAM funding. Michael Williams is on board or is on the call as well. And Steve Siegel has helped prepare a estimate on the use of that 75 million so that we can start showing that being used in part in the 23-24 session. And then it kind of goes up as we start entering into full design and start of construction. And so Michael Williams has received that, and that's will be forwarded on to I believe the Washington Transportation Commission. We've got the pending approval on the Infra 22 application. Very competitive. We'll see how that goes. And then, of course, there's the balance needed. So if you take a look at the original PCE, which was 500 million, so that shows about $200 million needed. That's the balance needed. And in conversations with Commissioner Fox, we just wanted to put a little bit of a placeholder there on escalation, because if you recall, the PCE had a 4% annual escalator, and we should probably be cautious to include the much higher interest rate as we're seeing. So there is an add-on there for 20 million just to show that that's been taken into consideration. And so, you end up with the bottom line, with the project being 520, but we've got 514 remaining.
So looking at this 520, what we want to do is once we get the RBMC in place, towards the end of the year, we want them to do an evaluation against the previous estimate and what has escalation actually shown us for that first year. And this is our educated guess that it's about $20 million, but they need to come up with a number. We need to look at it. And I think we've got to recognize that costs are going up. So just another indicator that the quicker we can get funding, the quicker we can get the bridge built, the cheaper it's going to be.
I think every time we talk to folks about the money, we should ask what the cost of the year's delay and what we save with the year's acceleration. I'd like to know those numbers and be ready to throw those out.
I think that's a great idea.
Would be a good,
Yeah.
like, one-page infographic. Just seeing them side by side.
Okay.
All right. So I will bring that document back up. And then the next one is the itinerary for our trip back east. I will be joining you. There was some question about whether it was going to be myself or Genevieve. Genevieve was named the interim executive director, and so she's going to be busy here. But there's the list of the participants, Commissioner Fox, Commissioner Anderson, Mayor McBride, Mayor Keithler, and myself. Hal will be accompanying us, and there's his phone number. So you have seen this in the past, but just to reiterate, we've got reservations at Yotel, which is halfway between the Hill and Hal's offices. And Hal normally will host us for dinner on that first evening. We'll meet with Hal at his offices to kind of review the schedule and kind of develop a strategy for the day. And requests have been sent to all of the delegation representing our areas in Oregon and Washington. One name that's not here that may be added is Representative Newhouse. And then on the second day, meetings will be scheduled with the U.S. Department of Transportation on the grant programs, and then also the TIFIA loan program. And then also with USDA. USDA has expressed interest in being involved with this project. And so it will be, I think, interesting for members of the working group to meet with them and learn a little bit more about their programs. So just in summary, the port has budgeted for these expenses in the current budget, or the budget that will be starting July 1. The port will pay for those individual rooms for the 2 nights. I'll go ahead and schedule your airfare on Alaska from Portland to DC. If for some reason those times don't work for you, go ahead and make your own reservations and then just hold on to your receipts, and then the port will reimburse you. Otherwise, if those times look fine, I'll go ahead and make those for us. So I'll reach out just to make sure I know which way you want to go. And then I will be paying for the taxis and the meals when we're in our group. But if for some reason we're splitting up for whatever reason, just hold on to your receipts and we'll get those settled up after the trip. So are there any other questions or comments or thoughts? One, I know that we met with Commissioner Fox and I met with Mayor Keithler last week, and we talked about putting together a 2-page handout, which if you look over here on the dry erase board, that right there is the origins of a 2-page handout, which we'll be developing in the next week. And we will definitely submit that out to everybody on the working group so we can get some additional comment. But the point being, we want to keep it very brief, make it very informational, not a lot of gray text, and try to incorporate graphics and pictures as much as possible. Once HNTB gets on board, they will have their public information team. We talked about developing a case study / press release about the project. Obviously, we're going to try getting those in the local paper, but perhaps in relation to this trip, it sounds like there's opportunities to place that article in either the Hill or Politico or some of the Capitol Hill publications as well. So any other comments about this trip or how we can be supporting it in advance?
Any feedback from last year? What, if you were doing it again, would you do anything different?
No, I think I would, the only thing that I would do different, which is obviously being done differently this time, is I would have had more interaction with Commissioner Dave Sauer. We had a couple of meetings with people together jointly, but I would have done all together.
Okay. So to have the whole group attend each one as
much as possible.
Yeah.
I just think that seeing the camaraderie between the states is really helpful.
Absolutely. And that reference to Commissioner Sauter, we were back there as far as the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association, and it just happened to be at the same time as the National Association of Counties. And so literally Klickitat County was in there right before the port came in. So we kind of took advantage of that, really what was a coincidence.
That's it. I'm really comfortable shooting.
On the whiteboard over there, under number, on the left, says pedestrian use. I think that's what that says. Number 5.
Oh, it's on the milestone? Oh, gotcha. Yes. The benefits.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
when I look back at our comment period for the supplemental draft EIS, I think a third of our letters were from bicycle interests. So that's always on the forefront of my mind.
Okay, next item.
All right.
Kevin, did you want me to share my news?
Yes,
Real
please,
quickly.
Miles.
Okay.
No, I don't really want you to. Go ahead.
So I wanted to let you all know that I have made the very difficult decision to leave Thorn Run Partners at the end of the month to accept a position as TriMet's new state government relations director. So I will unfortunately not be working with all of you and on this project very much longer. I will get to continue working on major transportation projects and on transportation policy, which is one of my passions. And I'm certainly excited about the opportunity to work for a large and impactful public agency that provides a good public service like TriMet. But I will be sad, very sad to leave my colleagues at Thorn Run and to leave all of my clients, including all of you. It's really been a pleasure to work with both the ports team, but also with the bi-state working group over these past few years. I'm very proud of some of the work that we've been able to do for the Hood River Bridge project. I know there's a lot more to be done. You are obviously in extremely good hands with Thorn Run in my absence. I'm biased, but I think they're the best contract lobby firm in the state. They will be hard to say goodbye to. But the Hood River Bridge will certainly have a special place in my heart, and I will be watching, probably from the sidelines, but watching and cheering you on, and excited to see how this project continues to move forward in the coming years. And hopefully I will see some of you in the hallways of the state capitol in the coming years as well, because I'm not going too far. Thorn Run is the contract lobby firm for TriMet, so I will still get to work with the Thorn Run team in that capacity as well.
Well, Miles, from all of us here, thanks so much over the years of what you've been able to do, helping us. We wish you the best in your next career. So,
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Miles. All right. So let's see, the next item on the agenda is our governance update. So Commissioner Benton and Steve Siegel and myself have been busy over the last several weeks. And so on the screen here, I'm going to try to bring the presentation up. So Steve, are you on board as well?
I'm here. Yes. Good afternoon, everybody.
So Commissioner Benton, do you want to start things off and then hand it off to Steve, or how would you like to proceed?
Well, I was thinking Steve could just move through the slides rather quickly, and hopefully we have some time at the end for questions. I'll just say that it's been, when we first started off, it seemed fairly simple. We just need to put a group together and then hand the bridge off to them. But as we dig into it, it's becoming quite complex, especially with the how the budget implications with respect to the port and how those end up being transferred, as well as I think Commissioner Anderson brought it up at the last update we had of this being like there's these kind of phases where this bridge authority may be a slightly different makeup. So in the build phase, maybe it looks a certain way, and then as we get to when the bridge is actually handed off and they're running it like it's kind of as the port is today, it looks different. So we're kind of working through some of that stuff, and it's been challenging, but I think it's good. So I'll let Steve take us through the slides, and we can question that.
Thank you, Kevin. You're gonna move the slides.
I am going to do my best.
Great, thank you. So this will be a quick overview. What you'll see soon is we're going to have a pretty busy next 4 or 5 months on these issues. So this is just trying to get you reintroduced into the topic and give you a little advanced warning about what's upcoming. As everybody knows, the statutes pass. They are materially the same in both states. The state of Washington actually is going through a process that they're required to do to make that determination on their own. But I don't see that as being a problem. So when we talk about the statutes, both Oregon and Washington on at least all the matters here today are identical. And so both statutes require that the local governments involved in a project adopt a commission formation agreement to actually form the Bi-State Bridge Authority. By adopting that agreement, the powers and authorities in the statute itself kick in, but the commission formation agreement has to address certain issues not addressed in the statutes. When you look at them, there'll be certain items that we are required by law to address in the commission formation agreement. And we'll go through those in a second. But in addition to that, the commission formation agreement can address any other provisions that the local governments deem appropriate. And one of the things we have begun to address in the commission formation agreement that are not required by statute, but are important to address, are how the transition from the Bi-State Working Group to the Bi-State Bridge Authority should occur. Lastly, the statutes allow the commission formation agreement to be enacted in phases. This was done primarily to allow a bit of time after getting the first agreement finalized to see if there needs to be any changes before adopting the final agreement. And so the way we are drafting the draft you will see next month, it will be done in phases. We hope to have the commission of formation agreement approved and executed by the end of this calendar year, and have the Bridge Authority formally start under its statutory authorities on July 1st of 2023. Next, please. If you recall, when we prepared the statutes a year ago, we went through, I think at that time, 4 cycles of review and comment. I believe this ought to be a little easier. So what's proposed here is to have 3 cycles, each roughly a month long, beginning in July, where I provide to you a draft agreement, and you and your staff, hopefully your attorneys, will review that and provide comments, and those comments will be addressed in the subsequent draft. And like I said, we anticipate that there'll be 3 cycles of these reviews and comments beginning in July, and with the objective of having agreement by the October meeting of the Bi-State Working Group on a complete and final phase 1 draft of the commission formation agreement. That would be followed by a month and a half time period during which the local governing bodies would review and hopefully approve and execute the agreements so that the agreement's fully executed, like I said, by the end of the calendar year. The other thing that we're proposing is that we nominate and appoint the directors, the board of directors to the bi-state working group approximately 6 months before they actually formally take office. So we're looking at kind of nominating and appointing board members pretty much in parallel with the approval of the commission formation agreement, with the possibility that it might have to take 2 to 4 weeks longer to get that done. So by mid-January, we would hope to have the board members appointed. Again, they wouldn't take formal office until July 1st of 2023, when the commission actually formally starts up. What that then does is allow about a 6-month transition period during which a variety of things will be done, all which will be addressed in the commission formation agreement. Next, please, Kevin. So when we look at the required items, and again, these are required by the statutes themselves, there needs to be an effective date stated in the commission formation agreement for the startup of the commission, which we have at this point targeted for July 1st, 2023. The commission formation agreement must also provide a name for this new bi-state bridge authority. We, meaning Commissioner Benton and Kevin and myself, have been noodling about these kinds of things and came up with a preliminary idea of naming it the Mid-Columbia Bridge Commission. But if anybody has better ideas, they're more than welcome. The other item that needs to be addressed in the commission formation agreement is something called the primary place of business. The primary place of business has an important legal role in the commission formation agreement, in that it determines which state's laws are applicable to most of what this bi-state bridge authority will be doing. We have been reviewing a number of issues. We are not prepared at this moment to actually make a recommendation. And the big issue that we've been trying to look into is to what extent does making the primary place of business in the state of Washington add to the sales tax that this new bridge authority will have to pay on certain items, and to how much does that add to the ongoing operating cost of this new commission? Again, we're not at a place right now where we're far enough along to make a recommendation, but we are looking into that. In terms of the board of directors, we do make a recommendation at this point in the draft, as it currently sits anyway, that there'd be 6 voting directors, 3 appointed by Klickitat County and 3 by Hood River County, with nominations from the cities and the port and others. The counties themselves would establish the formal process for soliciting nominations, and the CFA would establish some general criteria for the appointment of directors that both counties would use.
What term are you looking at for these board of directors? How many years?
I'm sorry, I could not hear.
The proposed term for these 6 directors, what are you guys thinking of, or have you gotten that for you?
The term, the term, the number of years of a term? Yes, we're looking at a 4-year term.
So you're basically looking at potentially 2 changeouts during the construction life of the project. If it's going to take us 8 years, you could potentially change out the board once.
Yeah, the other thing to take into account, again, some of these details will be in the draft. You'll see in mid-July. Didn't address them in the summary, but the initial appointments will need to be staggered. The statutes require that. One director might be for a 2-year initial 2-year term, one for a 3-year term, and another for a 4-year term. There's nothing in the statutes that actually limits the number of terms, and so that's another factor to take into consideration. But we were concerned about the transition. The bi-state working group members themselves have been involved, have a knowledge base that we didn't think ought to be lost in this transition. And so under option 1 there, one of the things we're thinking of including is that for a 1 to 2 year period, perhaps even longer, if that seems more appropriate, that the bi-state working group members would serve on the board, but in an ex officio or non-voting, as a non-voting member. But it does provide an opportunity for the bi-state working group members, to the extent they're not appointed or don't want to be appointed to the board of directors as voting members, but it will provide a way for the bi-state working group to remain involved and to facilitate that transition while the new board members get up to speed. The other item we are considering is to try to include, again, as ex officio members, some senior officials from the Department of Transportation and the treasuries of both states. Have a meeting, actually, the first meeting tomorrow, to discuss the possibility of DOT involvement. Not sure on how willing the state officials will be to participate, but we will begin those conversations tomorrow and report back next month on where they stand. And the last item that's required to be addressed is what are the requirements for formal actions of the board? And the current draft proposes that there'd be to pass a resolution or ordinance, a minimum number of 4 affirmative votes would be required. So those are the required elements in the proposal as it currently stands on those factors.
I have a question on the board of directors appointed by the counties. It says solicit nominations. So those could be those elected officials, somebody from their board, like we're elected officials from the board, or it could be someone from the community. So that is not spelled out, correct?
That's correct. And that's kind of one of those issues that our subcommittee has been discussing. But as it stands right now, there's no limitation. We've gone back and forth on what's appropriate there. And I do believe when we come in July and make a recommendation on that matter, that might be a place for discussion by the bi-state working group. Because I would certainly argue that if the board of directors of the bi-state bridge authority are all elected officials, that probably would be a concern to credit rating agencies. Now, I'm not saying it's a fatal concern or anything like that, but it would be something where they would prefer to see more independence, if you will, between the board of this bridge authority and the local governing bodies. So item to be discussed next month when we come in with the full proposal.
Will the CFA also address if either side wants to remove one of the board members?
Yes, and that's addressed. The board members, the county as the appointing body. So the board members serve at the pleasure of the county, and they can be dismissed with or without cause as proposed in the current draft. So yes, that will be addressed in the agreement when you see it.
You're saying by the county, you're talking about by the commission.
Well,
Are you talking
actually
about?
by both.
Oh, okay.
You know, let's say you have a person on the board that just not working out from both the commission and as far as, the counties. How do you get rid of them? Can you get rid of them?
And yes, Commissioner Fox, that's exactly the issue we're trying to address.
Okay.
So the non-required elements in the draft agreement, you will see almost entirely relate to the steps to be taken to transition from where we are essentially today to where this bi-state bridge authority has to be certainly within 2 years after it starts. So we're kind of looking at a 2 to 3 year transition period when you add it all together. There's a variety of issues related to that transition that are going to be addressed in the agreement. I tried to highlight some of the key ones here in this slideshow. And first of all, starting with the staffing. So at some point, the bi-state bridge authority very well might want to retain their own staff. But until that happens, we needed to come up with a staffing solution. And what we're proposing is that the Port Hood River staff kind of continue in its current function for the bi-state working group. It continues doing that for the bi-state bridge authority until told otherwise. And that'll be done under an agreement in that case between the bi-state bridge authority and the Port Hood River. In terms of budgeting, a couple of things. Number one, I think the Port Hood River in its upcoming budget, the one that starts in a couple of weeks, took the first step. And what it did was to divide what was called the Repair and Replacement Fund, where toll revenues were deposited and grant monies were deposited to be used on the replacement bridge, but it was combined with the repair part of the port's function as well, the major repair part. So the Port Commission has divided that fund into two funds, essentially a repair fund and a replacement fund. And what we're picking, so we pick up from there and start talking about the process by which the port, while it still has authority over some of the money, and the Bi-State Bridge Authority will cooperatively prepare a budget each year, because the budgets, at least for a time period, probably until the new bridge opens up, those two budgets are going to have to be in sync on certain matters. So we'll recommend a cooperative process to accomplish that, and essentially propose to the port that in budgeting the monies, that all of the toll revenues and grant monies that are used for the replacement bridge project be budgeted in the replacement fund. What happens today, for example, is that certain expenditures, the lobbyists, for example, wind up being budgeted in under the general fund of the Port-au-Hood River. And so the ability to see what's being spent and where that money's coming from gets very difficult. And so what we hope to propose, and been working with Kevin and Michael McKelway to make sure this works, is to come up with a way to make all that much more transparent. The other thing we're going to recommend is that there should be some unencumbered reserves in both the bridge repair fund, the repair fund and the replacement fund when the new bridge opens up. And we're going to suggest that any unencumbered reserves in either fund be transferred to the commission at that time or earlier if it's possible. So overall, you'll see some details on how we intend to facilitate this transition budgeting by both the commission and the port. Next, please. The other issue comes up with regard to grant responsibilities. Essentially, what we would currently recommend is that those grants for which the port is currently the grantee, meaning the $5 million federal grant, $5 million Washington grant, $5 million Oregon grant, that the port remain as the grantee and therefore responsible for those grants until they're fully spent, but that any new grant going forward, that the Bi-State Bridge Authority would be the grantee for those purposes, including the upcoming $75 million grant from the state of Washington. And lastly, and this is an item that I'm sure will take some time beyond the commission information agreement to try to get straight, is to recommend a process to initially capitalize the commission. So the commission is going to need money. A lot of its expenses will be grant eligible and paid by either the 15 million of existing grants or the 75 million of future grants. But not all of it will be. And so we have to make sure that there's a funding source available for those costs of the commission that will not be grant eligible. Then in addition to that, some of the grants will be reimbursement grants, meaning that it's likely that the Bi-State Bridge Authority will need a funding source to pay consultants in the first place and then get later reimbursed by a grant. But there needs to be some working capital available to the commission in order to operate. And lastly, there's going to need to be several reserves established for the Bi-State Bridge Commission relating to the financing. And some of those reserves will be established using money from the revenue bonds or the TIFIA loan. But some of those reserves either will have to be or will be better for all parties to have them funded with monies other than the revenue bonds or TIFIA loan money. And so we will need to try to determine a way to create those reserves. And what the commission formation agreement will do is try to establish a process for the local governments to work with the Bi-State Bridge Authority over the next year or so, first year of its operation or so, in order to create a working capital and to capitalize the reserves for the replacement bridge project. So I'll stop there and just ask if there are any questions.
I guess I'm a little confused about those reserves. If we had money, we would be putting it towards the bridge. Where are these reserve monies coming from? What are examples of places they might come from?
Where do they come from?
It's just an example of the sort of place, not specifically.
It's a little hard for me to hear, but the reserve,
Steve,
I'm sorry.
and the other four commissioners jumped in. If we decide to raise the tolls because of the replacement account only, those tolls have to go into that account. And that account could be used to help set up a reserve for operations. Like at some point in time, once this new entity comes into play, we're probably going to want to have some people working for us that's actually doing the work. That reserve would help pay for that. The other area, as you want to go out and get long-term funding, if we need to, you got to show that you've got a bank account and you're managing it properly. That's kind of what we're talking about here. It's just setting up the structure that allows you to put money in, spend money out.
But usually when you, we're talking about $500 million that we're looking for reserves against, so it has to be significant amounts of money, doesn't it?
No, well, I'm gonna let the experts say that.
Steve, how much in reserves are you anticipating being needed?
Well, when you, as Commissioner Fox was explaining, when you go for your loans, whether it's a revenue bond or TIFIA loan, or it'll be both, they'll demand a number of reserves that there'll be a debt reserve, which will be paid out of borrowed money, but there'll have to be an operating and maintenance reserve. There's likely to be a requirement that there'll be what people call a toll stabilization reserve, meaning some money set aside in case you have to raise your tolls but can't do it right away. They'll might have to be a ramp up reserve. So if you are, if you have to ramp up your toll rates in order to get to a level required to meet debt service, there'll be some concern on the part of the lenders about how that all works out. So they'll require you to create a reserve for that.
So
And like I
Steve-
said, they'll have to be a
Steve.
working reserve. So you'll be looking at beyond the reserves that are going to be paid with proceeds from the borrowings themselves. I would think we want to put together a minimum of 10 and hopefully $15 million in reserves.
You say 15.
10 to 15.
That's before we start, we open the bridge. So between the next 8 years.
Yeah, and
So are we, you're saying we need this reserve money. We don't even have enough for the rest of it. So the only one that's making money right now from the current bridge is Ford. And we talked about the possibility of raising the toll to come up with this reserve money, because I don't think our cities or our counties are going to come up with that money. So is that what we're really talking about? Raising the current tolls in order to get this reserve fund?
I would say that has to be considered a primary option. I think we can also try to determine if there are other things we can do to create some kind of conditional pledges of money that would not kick in except in certain circumstances. Perhaps, from local governments or from state government. But the one of the things to keep in mind is that the reserve commitment will have to be in place when by the time we are seeking credit ratings and applying for TIFIA loans. Because even though it doesn't mean you have to have all the money in the bank at that time, but there has to be a system in place and a commitment towards those monies in order to get the kind of credit rating you're going to want to get and to be eligible for the loans and the revenue bonds.
Yeah, I'd say one thing that came out of this process is that when we look at what the cost of the bridge is going to be, with the estimate that was put together, that assumes that we're paying cash. Right. And I think, through this process, working to put together the bridge authority, that's one thing that I found out was that, if you borrow any of that money, you have to figure that reserve amount needs to be there as well. It hasn't been included in the estimate of the bridge.
Can some of it not be structured as like an intergovernmental loan to stage up the authority at its origin? So that almost you're
You're
just.
gonna have to say that louder.
Oh.
You don't have a microphone, I'm sorry.
So is some of this also just assume there's a scenario where it can be an intergovernmental loan from the port to fill those reserves upon creation on paper, and then when that money comes in, it's paid back? Or are you seeing this as all these entities need to have set aside cash that's going into the new authority?
I think it's going to be a combination of both. I do think you're going to want to have some cash reserves, but there can be loans, like I said, conditional loans. If X happens, we'll kick in a couple $100,000 each, that kind of thing. And one of the reasons why the commission formation agreement will not be making a specific recommendation on this, because it's going to take some time to kind of work out these details. And so what the commission formation agreement will do is to try to establish a process and a time frame to do this in.
So just to make sure I understand, it sounds like there's a suggestion that the cities and the counties will need to in some way use their credit to secure some portion of these loans. And, you know, I know that we've got amounts of money to secure when we build a sidewalk. We don't have anything that would be in any way meaningful in securing $500 million in loans. Am I?
But Steve,
We're not looking for $500 million.
Well, we don't know. We could be looking for 200 to
100, 200 maybe.
but
if we get all these other grants, that
All the
we're asking
grants.
for, which are not
Yeah.
your thing at all.
I mean, I don't think it's realistic that all of the other 5 agencies would be contributing funds from your own coffers to fund this. I don't think anybody really thinks that's a serious option.
Security, though.
Well, I think really what we're looking at is that the port has cash in its reserves. Can that be leveraged with perhaps a toll increase? Would those be the 2 primary areas for funding those reserves? And that's, I think, are the most.
Steve did say something about the cities and the counties
Yes.
putting something in, and that's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to understand, to make a reasonable expectation.
Yeah, I don't think there was any security tied to it. And that was from the
Which
conversation
was
I had.
security.
No, it was, I think what it was, if I remember right, it seemed to be like a nominal amount that would be put forth as our contribution as local governing bodies to commitment toward the project and the initial upstart. And I think, you know, we
So some-
jokingly came up with a, you know, $100 a piece, no, maybe 5,000, you know, some number to say, we're all in this together, here's the commitment. And that's how I kind of interpreted it. But I think realistically, Kevin made the point, the port is, I think, the only likely place where these funds come from.
Right, no, I guess I just want to make sure that there wasn't some expectation that wasn't following.
Not as far as security that I understood.
That's what I was trying to.
Right, you were.
Yes.
And one example is kind of like these grants that Klickitat County and the port are jointly applying for. So, for example, they always say, well, what's Klickitat County's contributions towards the project? And in the prior grant applications, it's really been more about Klickitat County staff contributing to the project. And so Gordy's been really involved in that. So, you know, it's enough to enough to, you know, pass the straight face test and showing that there's a community support for the project moving forward.
So one I was gonna ask if we've looked into yet is, I know when we're doing these large projects, cash on hand is very important. And I don't know what portion of these grants are reimbursement versus loans that you get all in front. But we're looking at, you know, potentially $10 million a month of expenses. And if your grant reimbursement takes 90 days, you're 3 months out, you're $30 million in. And we started looking at where we're going to get that kind of cash on hand to hold that much money during the actual construction process. What that interest rate is going to be, if we're going to have to go out on the commercial paper market or find somewhere. And those costs associated with that, because the feds are, say, 4 months, 5 months out on their reimbursement. You could be sitting in a really big hole real quick.
I think that's a perfect example of the types of things that having this cash reserve is only scratching the surface on. I mean, I think, yeah. Right. Bridge loan or construction loan. Absolutely.
One reason where we're bringing in the RMDC is to help us do that. They've got access to the types of people that we need to do that kind of study. The port certainly doesn't have that.
And I think in this formation agreement, what we're most interested in is identifying the mechanism of how those funds get from point A to point B. I would agree that actual number is going to be generated by somebody that's more experienced.
So you're looking for the structure and the backbone.
Yeah, exactly.
And how that methodology
Gets from how those funds make it from where they're at. Part of the final.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand order of magnitude, so I have some understanding of the.
Sure.
It's,
Well, it's gonna be more than $10 million.
Yeah,
yeah.
When we're in
Right.
construction, it'll be a lot more.
But I think that was the most eye-opening part of the entire process of going down the road of this formation agreement. The number that we're seeing being floated around, $500 million, is likely 10% or 15%.
That's why, when we had an earlier discussion, talking to our supporters in Oregon, 25 is way too late. We gotta get funding much earlier on this project to allow some room for drawdowns like that. It's not gonna solve all of it, but the more you can get earlier, the better position.
and if I could, I think one of the things too is that these roadmaps are also intended to send a signal to those credit agencies and other funding entities. So we're not necessarily going to have all the answers to what those dollar amounts are, how that's all constructed, but that it's important that the CFA actually show to those looking at it that those interests are being considered. And what the details are, nobody in this room knows what those are at this point. That's where the project management team will help us and help you through that process. But it's important that the CFA call it out in some shape or form so that if people are looking at it, it's like, okay, this organization, this future organization is going to be there to support those loans and bonds and construction commitments for the entire project.
Well, we talked a little bit about the monies that the port would have to come up with for these reserves and the tolls that
Yeah.
we might need to charge to do that. And so, this just puts it on paper. And when we get the RBMC, that's probably one of the early things, the finance part, to figure out what that's gonna be. We can't wait 2 years to start that.
Yeah.
They're gonna say, well, no, the tolls have to change within 3 months or 6 months or whatever, and to get this amount by X time when we need it.
Yeah.
So, it's a big lift.
I have a question for clarification, because I know that Miles was, in his report, was talking about a grant that we couldn't go after because it was for cities and counties only. So is the formation of this group gonna then allow for us to be eligible for those grants because there are cities and counties involved in it, or?
Well, I would defer to Dan, but
Does it open us up for additional revenue sources, or is it gonna,
Excellent question.
or is it gonna limit us?
We
That,
could do in this structure that would allow us to.
so Dan, I don't know if you can hear me, but so the IIJA funding was limited to cities and counties. This new bridge authority is basically a special district, but special districts have not been eligible for those funds in the past. Is that correct?
That's right. And that pot of funding they put it in was not heavily subscribed previously. There wasn't much money in it. So this is the first time that account saw a lot of money. And I don't think there's any indication necessarily that there will be more money in it after this last allocation. So I don't know that. I think at best you would say that the authority would be not able to participate in accounts that are dedicated just for cities and counties. I just don't know that those accounts will be fruitful in the future anyway, if that makes sense.
This one, the way we're setting this up, Steve, is that to me, it looks like the source is really Hood River County and Klickitat County. And they're the ones that are populating this organizational structure. Is there a way that we can claim that, yeah, this is tied to a county? In fact, it's tied to 2 of them across state lines.
I think what he said is that IAJA is an odd beast.
No, I get that. Except there's just a little, what was attractive for us this time is with a lot of money sitting there, so let's go after it.
But that's not what
And we said, well, we can't really get any of it because we're not a city or a county.
What,
The way this thing is getting structured, can we structure it where it could?
I think that.
the one, there's creative ways to kind of deal with it, and I haven't looked into this in great detail. But the counties could apply for the money and through an intergovernmental agreement provided to the project.
Yes.
Right, and so I think a couple of things to note. Number one, when it comes to the federal grants, I think this authority would be eligible for all the grants in the IIGA that I'm aware of anyway, that cities and counties are eligible for. It's a municipal corporation, and therefore it would be an eligible grantee under any of those major federal grant programs. And like I said, we can have cities and or counties apply for those monies that only cities or counties can apply for, and provide that money to the project through intergovernmental agreements. And the other parties to take into consideration are the DOTs who have loan programs and that we might be able to take advantage of. And I'm going to begin to try to discuss that with the DOTs beginning tomorrow.
So I think what you just brought up is something that I hadn't thought about, but to me makes a lot of sense that we could have the two counties and even the cities apply for certain grants that could be transferred into us legally with these agreements that are in place.
Yes.
I think this goes back to Dan and others. Is there opportunities that we're missing trying to attract funding that this could open up for us?
So presently, no. The bridge funding, which was done on an allocation basis, is sitting in that local bridge program that will be allocated out. As we've traced the IIJA dollars, I'm not aware of other situations for which there are discretionary grants right now flowing either from IIJA or elsewhere that just cities and counties are eligible for. But to your point, Commissioner Fox, we'll go back and take a look at it and make sure there aren't, that I'm right there. Certainly cities and counties get an allocation from the Highway Trust Fund that I'm sure they have other purposes for that are not discretionary dollars. They don't have to apply for that by right they get. And that discussion always comes up in any transportation bill. So there will be a discussion about how dollars flow in the next transportation bill that could produce a conversation around these kinds of IGAs. But I'll take a look. I'm not aware of other substantial accounts for which special districts are not eligible, but we'll double check and come back.
Yeah, and just I want to put a nail on this notion of special district. I know Kevin mentioned that this bi-state bridge authority as a legal matter is not a special district. And so you don't look, if we're going to look for legislation, the word special district probably doesn't help us. And if we're going to amend legislation, we should not use the word by special district. This is a thing unto itself. It's a bi-state bridge authority, and it's governed as if it's a municipal corporation.
I would just add, Kevin and Commissioner Fox, this is Hal Heemstra from DC. There is one pretty significant program in the IIJA that state DOTs cannot apply for, and that's the safety program, the new Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Program, which has about $6 billion over the life of IIJA. And that is specifically set aside for MPOs, cities and counties, so that they intended it to be a source of funding that didn't flow through state DOTs. But this bridge is not going to get built by Safe Streets program. So That's the one one exception. And I think the new discretionary bridge program that was announced late last Friday and the NOFO came out today, that's just a really excellent opportunity, the next excellent opportunity at the federal level for federal funding. And that puts up $2.4 billion with grant requests due by August 9. So that's pretty fast turnaround, but given the fact that the port and the county, Clickitat County, just put in the infra grant, we should be able to crib pretty carefully and quickly from that grant and put together a bridge discretionary grant pretty quickly.
I'd like to challenge one thing you said. I just want to make sure that when we're talking about this funding source for bicycles and pedestrian walkways across bridges, we are not eligible for that.
No, you would be. The Safe Street program is really set up to try to address kind of retrofitting of existing facilities. And I just think that it's not where USDOT is going to go with that particular funding source. But having a bicycle pedestrian component to the bridge project is incredibly important, because this administration will continue to use that as a significant screen within their review of eligible applications.
Well, if we could, I think, get enough support here, you know, that bicycle pedestrian lane, if you will, on our new bridge is probably equal to about 1/5 the cost of the bridge. So if we can create a story there that we could go after, that's a lot of money. That's
that is a lot of money, and it's a good question, Commissioner Fox, and one that we can visit with USDOT about when you come out in July, because we will be meeting with both the Bridge Discretionary Grant Program, but also with the Safe Streets program, and we can talk. And the Safe Streets program deadlines are not until September, so we can talk about whether it makes sense to also put in a Safe Streets program grant request, and then be pending in 3 different places: infra, bridge discretionary, and Safe Streets. Those are the kinds of questions that I think it'll be really valuable to have the group of the bi-state working group officials sitting around the conference room table with USDOT, kind of strategizing how to put together the pieces to come up with the money that we really need.
Other items for yourself? Are you feeling comfortable with where you're going with this thing?
There's a lot of unknowns.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I think that we got an ambitious timeline of putting this together. But I'm concerned with the unknowns and what we don't know could arise that we don't take into account. So, that's it's challenging. So I have confidence in what we're doing, but it's, you know, it's kind of a unique animal.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're creating something from nothing. That's always kind of fun.
Since Al brought it up, how much are we gonna push for on the state grant? What are we gonna ask for?
Yeah, Hal, what does the NOFO have guidance as far as the limits?
For discretionary bridge?
Right.
Yes, so there are 2 different deadlines, actually. There's a deadline that is very soon, July 25th, and that's for planning applications. But I would not recommend that we put in a planning application. I would recommend that we try to go for significant construction funding, particularly because this NOFO is very clear that they are willing to look at multi-year grant agreements, kind of like in the transit world. And they're starting to do that with some of these really big bridge projects, because they recognize that a $200 million federal grant is probably a pretty big grant to give in 1 year. But if they could give 50 million this year, 100 million, and commit 100 million next year and maybe 50 the following year, that's something that they could then start to budget, as could the project. And so the deadline for August 9 says that that's the deadline for projects that are over $100 million, which obviously this one is. So those are the two deadlines, one a planning deadline, July 25th, and a project deadline of over 100 million. That deadline is August 9.
How,
Would you go after $150 million?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Would you suggest we go after 200 to $250 million?
I would suggest that we stay with the same number that we asked for in the infra grant. So at that $195 million level. And just really drive home the point when you all come out here that 200 million is critical to the success of this project. And, you know, it builds on the nearly 100 million that's been already raised. And so that gets the project close to, you know, close to 300 million. And then we still have 200 million that we got to figure out how to fund. But we'll be meeting with the TIFIA folks. We'll be meeting with USDA loan folks. I'm hoping to set up a meeting with Mitch Landrieu at the White House, who is the infrastructure czar, just so we put it on the White House agenda that this is a really critical piece of infrastructure. And Mitch Landrieu, as the former mayor of New Orleans, really likes to meet with mayors. And so we've got a couple of mayors who are coming out with the bi-state working group. Mitch Landrieu has written a book. We need to all read that book between now and then and make sure that he is very happy to meet with mayors and wants to be an advocate for us with USDOT. What he will say is that he doesn't have the money, that the money is in Pete Buttigieg, USDOT's realm, but he can still be a huge advocate for the project. And if the White House is helping to advocate for the project with Secretary Buttigieg, that will be very helpful to us.
I thought one of the requirements for the bridge discretionary construction grants was you had to be 18 months from the start of construction, which I don't know that we could convince people we are at this point. I also think that the planning portion would cover, you know, all the engineering and project management work and so on over the next 2 or 3 years, or could cover that. That needs to be done. So I guess I would ask that you, or maybe you and I offline ought to talk about whether giving up on the planning grant, because the planning grant is, there's no eligibility problem. Plus, you know, they're talking about, there's language, as you know, about rural areas and you know, getting a $30–40 million planning grant would be a big benefit to this project, and it may have considerably better odds than going after a $20 million construction grant at this point in time.
Those are really good points, Steve. I would love to talk to you more about those. The NOFO just came out today, so I'm just reviewing it still, but you make a good point on the planning grant. The planning grant deadline is the 25th of July. So, you know, we've got a month then, but yes, let's continue to talk about that, because if that can close a gap and then we don't have to spend the 75 million from Washington State to do planning and engineering and can put that more into the construction side. I think if we're successful with USDOT, as we already have been with the build grant, if there was a build grant and a discretionary planning grant, and we're still pending on the infra, it shows a pattern of commitment on the part of USDOT that would help us in subsequent rounds of funding.
Yes, absolutely.
Hal, real quickly, the bike peds safe street safety program, what's the
Mhm.
maximum application amount? What would you be recommending from that pot?
I don't have a good answer for you off the top of my head. I need to go back and look at it. I haven't been focused on that as a source of funding for this project. But it's a good question and one that I need to go back and look at.
Okay. Should we go ahead and close this out and move on to the next subject? Thank you so much, guys.
Well,
Thank you.
Go ahead. Hold on.
So maybe I'm incorrectly reading between the lines, but when I talked to Bob, I got the feeling that one of the issues that we have is that we're creating a new municipal corporation which doesn't have any credit history, and some portion of the money that we're going to be seeking is going to be in loan money from people other than the federal government. We're going to want some security in some form. By all rights, this is something that should be a DOT project, but it's not. Is there some process by which the state of Oregon and the state of Washington would be available to underwrite loans that we were creating? Has something like that ever been done? Is there some, what is that called?
I think that's a great question to ask the RBMC.
Okay.
And their
That's a
financial.
good one. Yeah. I can wait.
All right. Okay, thanks, guys. Let's go back to the agenda. Are we ready for the RBMC negotiation?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and start that
What
conversation?
we would like to do is have two general discussions on this, and the second one, we'd like to kind of hold a smaller group discussion about it for just a few minutes. And we can release all of the folks that are on the Zoom meeting, so we can have that kind of a discussion, if that would be acceptable to you folks. Sure. Why don't we go ahead and Catherine, if you could stay on, and the rest of the folks, thanks so much.
Matt? Matt Ransom. I think we're going to go into executive session.
Okay, all right. Pardon me. See you.
Thank you, Matt.
Are you gonna stop the recording?
Yeah, let me stop that here. I appreciate